like we've made some very different choices with our tool stack than perhaps our peer sets are right now. When we sort of sat down and wrote out our software strategy at the beginning of the journey, we wanted to like reduce costs, reduce complexity, reduce overhead. And so, we've done a lot of like looking at open source tools, looking at self-hosted tools so that our things are compiling faster so that we can access things quicker. But like one of the really big, like very specific, this was a learning at Phoenix, and this is what we did differently this time, was around only ever having one tool for a problem. So, this was really bad at Phoenix, but I'm sure not only the only studio that does this, where, individuals come to a team with a preference for a particular coding app or a particular art tool. And as a company, you want individuals to feel good about the work that they're doing. You want to like increase individual productivity. And so you end up saying yes to everybody's tool. And so if I use art, for instance, at Phoenix, we had like Maya and 3ds Max and Modo all in the pipeline, being used by different artists because that was what made them feel individually the most productive. And so we sat down on day one and we're like, well, there will only be one art tool. No matter what, no matter who we hire, we're going to have one art tool. And so it was either, it's either going to be Maya or it's going to be Blender. And our first artist's like, well, I haven't worked in Blender. So he took a month and now he can do everything in Blender, and we have no overhead cost. And we know that the next person who comes in may have a slightly longer onboard into Blender than if we just handed them a Maya license. But we've got one set of tools, one comparative experience for each of the developers, a lower overhead cost, a longer term ability to be, be able to affect our tool chain ourselves. And so like making that choice on every tool and looking at every tool in the stack that way has been really beneficial for us as well.
One thing that you touched on but kind of didn't dive into that I think is really important. I think at many companies, and I think back to my time as an individual contributor, if you will, or like an artist or a programmer at my previous jobs. I was very much viewed as like my ability to get code into the game, or my ability to make a good looking level and light this level, and like did I hit my, you know if I think back to like the Splinter Cell days, like how many chairs did I model in a given period of time. And so I was totally that guy. I was the one Softimage guy that like would walk around Ubisoft with the Softimage XSI license, even though they were using 3D Studio Max at the time. And but because I could just get more done quickly, and I very much viewed my success as my ability to complete, my work, my craft my craft tasks at the highest quality in the shortest amount of time, right? And I got lots of head pats for moving quickly and at quality. One of the things that we don't recognize it in that same way here. Like, we are very much did we collectively get the game closer to the players feeling amazing and having a great experience? And is the game better collectively as a group in a given period of time? Did we achieve our collective goals? It doesn't really matter whether or
Yeah.
not we used Maya or Soft or Blender or any of these other tools. It's like, hey, did we all do the right work in the right way? And like, one of the things that we kind of continuously spun around at Phoenix was like, artist A uses Soft or uses Max, and artist B uses Maya, and like, there's no work interchangeability. And so like if, character A needs to get worked on,
Character artist B
B
can't come in and
can't do it trivially, or there's like a complicated, bring it into
Yeah.
FBX and bring it over
Right.
to the other thing, and you lose a bunch of value, you lose the history and all this other stuff, right? And so like, yes, it would have probably taken 15-20% more onboarding time, let's say called, on the long end, a month to relearn the tooling. What we ended up losing was often way worse
Right. Well, it's
than
because,
what we
I mean,
gained by that initial onboarding.
I don't know how many people out there have had to interact on the tools side that much because it is a less focused on thing in game dev. And it's weird that maybe now it really wasn't focused on much even when studios had to do it all in-house. And now with Unreal and Unity, I think people think like, oh, that's sort of somewhat solved. And I'm like, I even hear that from people inside industry, and I'm like, not at all. Never.
No, and
But there's
I
a
think it's gone the opposite route. I think that level of specialization has gone to the point where we are weaker as an industry now than we have ever been
Mhm.
in our history. Like I think about the Unity and Unreal thing. Like there are, um, if I use my time as an artist, and while I shipped most of my games in Unreal, I was not like an Unreal artist. I was an artist who happened to use Unreal most of the time. There
Yeah.
are lots of folks out there now that their entire existence demands that the teams solve problems in a very specific fashion. And the method is like their paychecks are very much reliant on the utilization of a given method. And that's dangerous. That's not a
Yes.
good spot for anybody to be in, because now the companies must make games that look like this and are built like this, even if the product wants it to be, even if the players want something very, very different. And because the artists can't make art in a way that the players might want, and the companies can't
Yeah.
take the risk of retraining at the cost and all this other stuff, we've actually, and like, there are entire disciplines that are fundamentally missing because of the ubiquitous nature of these engines. Like the super low level engineers are not
They're be-
trained in the same way anymore, right? Like
yeah.
there are way more
Yeah.
UI engineers in existence than there are graphics and systems programmers now. And
Right.
like that's not a healthy spot for our industry.
Yeah.
And I think it creates, a really negative cycle.
I have this idea in life. It's that everything is trade-offs. And this isn't strictly true, but broadly I find this to be very true. Everything is trade-offs. You don't get to pick like, oh, I'll take the option that only has pros and no cons, and you idiot, you pick the ones that has cons. It's like, well, the problem is when we're in something, we tend to see its cons, and when we're not in something, we tend to see its pros. And so it's really easy to always look, that's why the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. We're always like looking and going like, well, that thing would solve these problems I have. Yes, but you would inherit whatever problems come with it. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't or should. It does mean look at this through a more nuanced lens of recognizing pros and cons. So when you're talking about remote work, when you're talking about this choice of one thing, I could see someone out there right now who's so offended and like, well, I can't believe you wouldn't like Blender. Heck no, I'm a something or
Yeah.
other that the way I define myself, that's not it. And you're going, cool, that's a trade-off we've made, and that means that
Yeah.
this person who's offended won't work here, and we
Yeah.
accept this trade-off, right? We accept that is going to happen, and it's okay because this does actually have pros to it. And one of them is simplicity of tool stack, which again, if you've ever had to work in tools teams or in tech art spaces, like you were talking about, we think of this stuff just like, oh yeah, I'll just move it from here. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. In fact, all those companies are incentivized for it not to work that way through market forces. So they're not trying to play nice with each other often. And even if they were, they're all building in different directions. And so it is very difficult to support a whole ton of different tools that all do the same thing
Yeah.
inside of the same system.
Yeah, and I think like coming back to the retro, part of coming out of that retro, we kept looking at these choices that we'd made that were compromises, but frequently we never committed to the choice, right? So it wasn't like we had a choice between A and B, and we kind of did both poorly. And we never like we said these have pros and these have cons, but then we didn't really like wholeheartedly commit to one side or the
Yes.
other. We tried
Yep.
to live in both worlds.
Yep.
And I think like for lots of good reasons, and we learned a lot, and I'm not just saying we were bad at our jobs, but like, first time going through as founders, first time trying to make these choices, there were a lot of times where we would compromise and try to live in two worlds. And then obviously that's going to just come down the road into a set of dominoes where there's confusion or there's lack of communication or clarity. And so as we're like looking at these choices coming out of the retro, we sort of set a number of these what we now consider to be like the non-negotiables for this round. And that's not to say that they are the right choice for every company ever. I think that there are lots of companies for whom working remote is what is the right choice for them because of their goals and their strategies. And I have like no shade against them if that's how they want to work. It's not how
Yeah.
I want to work. It's not how we're going to set up. But we did day one say this is non-negotiable. And there's a series of those types of things. One's around the tech stacks. We actually did the exact same thing with salaries, Which this probably sounds extremely heretical as well, but we have non-negotiable salaries. We set a table. We said, if you're at this seniority, you get paid these dollars. If you're this seniority, you get paid these dollars. And as each person has come to us and we've talked to them about it, we've explained to them why we set up the system, how we came up with the numbers, what the goals are. And then we say this is a non-negotiable so that everybody is treated equitably, fairly, so that there's no negotiation biases in people's comp packages, so that we can predict our runway in the long term, so that we can manage our cash flow. And when you can set through the context and the why, it's a lot easier for somebody to opt into that at the other end. And so
Right,
I
yeah.
think we've been a lot more confident in presenting things as non-negotiables this
I
time.
think if we just kind of take it up a level, one of the key kind of learnings and why are much more called opinionated this time around, or like rules oriented this time around, was that, like, as the business leaders for the team, what we both of us have always had a very call it we want, our job is to create an environment that can keep people employed for as long as possible, right? Like if somebody comes to work at CPG, or 9 years ago, if they came to work at Phoenix Labs, the goal was for them to have a forever company to work at. That's always been my goal. Like, I want to create amazing experiences that, with a team that I get to work with forever. And that, it's a strong commitment that that commitment, however, gets harder and harder the more that you erode and change and create chaos in called the parameterization of how you operate your business, right? Like, the more compromises that you have to make, the more risk you inject into that system, which then makes it harder and harder and harder to maintain and manage that forever company vision.
Yeah.
And when we sat down and we're like, hey, we're going to take another swing at this, both of us were like, this is the last swing that we're doing. I don't want to start another company when I'm 50. I want to, I'm either going to finish this one out with retirement or finish it out with failure, one or the other. And, as we looked at like what could put that at risk, it was, early compromise. So it was a key lesson that I got in my game direction career from Casey Hudson, the game director or the executive producer on the Mass Effect franchise, taught me this very early in my leadership career, of like, the goal of a great game director is to minimize the amount of compromise that you take in on a project for as long as you possibly can. Like, you will have to compromise, and the quality of a game is really determined. And this is a guy that like eats and sleeps 90+ Metacritic games, right? Like, he's an incredible creative who, consistently would be like, we are not making compromise in pre-production. We're definitely not pre-production, and I'm going to try not to make any in production. And I've kind of looked at that and gone, like, pretty holistically, like, how do we not make, and it does mean trade-offs. Like, I think about the remote thing. Like, there have been fantastic folks that I would love to work with again, approach us and say, hey, please, I need to work with you again. And unfortunately, they live, on the East Coast or in California. And I'm like, you want to move back to Vancouver? Right? And for very good reasons. They have family, cost of living's too high, blah, 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 right? Like, these are really good reasons why that moving to Vancouver is a fundamentally incompatible thing with their current life. And I'm like, well, I can't bend these rules. And they're like, well, of course you can. And it's like, well, in the same way that you shouldn't bend your rules, like that's setting your life up for success. I've got, I've got 7 other folks here who rely on Jen and us, setting up and positioning ourselves in a way that that we believe will result in the highest degree of success. And the longer that we can maintain that without compromise, I think the better off we are in general.
And this actually just popped for me, that idea of, I have this, like, the smallest unit that produces value is the team, not the individual. If you frame your
Hmm.
world like that, you will
Yeah.
be better off, because as much as one person can do so, like, I'm not saying like, oh, if you're a solo dev out there, you are the team, so good, that
Yeah.
different circumstance. But for those that are there, like, there is very little that any one person tends to be able to do alone. It's gonna get seen by somebody else. It's gonna get checked. There's some other thing that's gonna have to happen. Very rarely can someone
Yeah.
just say like, I'm just gonna build this thing and then put it on live, and it's, or put it into the build, and that, like, nobody else had to see it. In fact, if that happens, it's an anti-pattern. Um,
Yeah.
and everything you're describing is, look, we are, as we're making these harsh trade-offs, which another studio may make a different set. That's fine. But you're making a set and you're saying this is to help us be the most effective team we can be.
Yeah.
Hey, leaders and game devs, if you love what we do here at Building Better Games, imagine what we could create with your support. By joining our Patreon, you help us bring deeper insights, develop better training, and host more expert discussions to level up your leadership and game development skills. Plus, as a patron, you're going to get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early access to episodes, and a chance to ask your burning questions directly to us. Join now and help us build better games together. I'm looking through this and I'm thinking I wanted to talk more about remote. I mentioned that to you earlier, but there's a bunch of stuff in there that we described. We talked about tools and tech stacks. We talked about like salary and like
Yeah.
holding lines.
Actually, you mentioned values as well, and that was a really big learning that came. So Phoenix was very much a like values-led company. We had 4 core values that were incredibly important to us. We talked about them regularly. They're on the website. They're in every meeting. Like
We won awards based on that.
yeah, like it was, and we made decisions using our values. And the values were very much tied to like how we think about people and how we think about treating people and the type of like working environment we wanted people to experience. And so another thing that's been sort of interesting and different for us on this journey is, instead of being a values-led company, we're really organized ourselves around sort of these strategies towards success. And so to our previous piece, like the idea of like, what can we do to set ourselves up for success? And we've sort of identified that these are like the 5 strategic pillars that are most likely to result in us being successful. And so when we go to make decisions, it's not, how do we feel about a decision? It's strategically, does this decision make us more or less likely to be successful? And I think that sometimes that means that we feel sad about a decision, like not hiring
Does the
remote.
decision follow the pattern that is suggested by the strategy?
Yeah.
Right. Versus how do I feel about, the socio impact or the personal impact that it had. I think if we were to kind of like talk about the 2 kind of key differences between Phoenix and Critical Path, like Phoenix was the underpinning of the whole company was with people at the ends, not the means, which then got interpreted mostly as a person is the ends, not the means, and all things shall never have any meaningful impact or negative thing on a given individual. And so and that is not to say that, we didn't work overtime or like, bad things didn't happen. Like, we were by no means a perfect organization, and we did our best, but we were. Unfortunately, to your point, video games aren't made by a person or even a group of person. They are made by a people and a team, and often, communities of people coming together require that some amount of self-sacrifice is a part of that equation. Mm-hmm. And that self-sacrifice can be things like, I have to, get on the SkyTrain every morning and come into an office. Some of that might mean I have to work a little bit of overtime. Some of that might mean,
learning new tools,
right? There are varying degrees of it. And it's not about creating conformity. It's about creating a community that is collectively coming together to find collective success. And we, in the CPG version of this, it's very much about the community wins together, not, an individual's lack of self-sacrifice is the only measure that we use to define our success. And to your earlier point about like that winning is always a reflection of the value that we've created for our players. Not, we
talk a lot about like we're in the business of commercial art.
Yeah,
we're not here to make a game that's fun for us to interact with by ourselves. Like the point isn't for Jesse to get some particular vision out of his head for his own purposes. Our purpose is to create commercial art that will delight players so that they want to reward us with money for that so that we can continue to do it again.
Yeah.
And like in the business, it's
a capital.
It's not a hobby.
Yeah. It's not a charity. It's not a hobby.
Right.
If I just want to get my passion project out. Yeah.
It's not a charity, it's not a hobby, but it's also not, hey, there's this game, and once I've built that game, no matter how it does, I'll view myself as having succeed. Because there's no, like you were saying, like, look, I was going to retire and tinker with cars. Maybe there's like, I'll just do one last final, like, this is the game I always wanted to make, and if nobody plays it, no big deal. I can afford it or whatever.
It's a factory game. We prototyped it. It was not a good idea. We very specifically. There was a running joke here. We actually had a counter on the wall of days since Jesse talked about a factory game,
making a factory
game, and like our investors and support folks, like everybody knew that like that we were going to make a factory game because God knows I wanted to get one out of my system.
So we prototyped
it, and it was the fastest fail that we have done in prototyping. Like, it was like,
I love it.
I took one swing at trying to manage that economy, and I was like, get me out of here. I should make this game over the course of 10 years in like JavaScript and not make a real video game. Like and to be clear, I love factory games. Factorio, I think, is one of the greatest works of mankind, and yet I should never inflict that pain of me designing one of those on a team.
Yeah. See, and by the way, I love that too, because there is a different configuration, a different goal state for your studio, let's say, where it was Absolutely. Like, well, that's it. That's what we're going to make. And like, we're all going to get paid.
For sure.
We're all
there's nothing wrong with those. Like,
right. But you
I'm
you
so
are
proud of people that can get their vision and they can create a configuration that makes sense. I've got buddies that are off doing that right now, and that's great. It's just not for us. Like we want to be a sustainable long-term business. Like I want to be a BioWare like entity that creates value for players. And I think about like the lead up to my departure of BioWare, where it was like BioWare was so well known for quality in the workplace, quality for the players, and and quality for the product. And like, and I want those kind of that same sort of like feeling. I want our audience to come to know us for making stuff for them, and for a long time. And we think that our core 5 strategy pillars are likely to set us up, and therefore, kind of coming back to earlier in the conversation, like as we wash decisions through something, instead of washing it through, a relatively feelings or like this kind of fuzzy values equation that isn't really clearly defined, we have a much more clearly defined set of like thought processes and strategy that we talk very, very openly about, of like, cool, here are the 5 kind of pillars, and like here's how we make decisions based on those things, and like, and we kind of just go through that and go, is this a good or bad idea for us? Yeah. And it's always a for us thing. And there's no judgment when somebody else does something different. That's not what that's about. It's about like, we take a thing and we make it successful this way.
All right. So there's a good segue again, because I know I want to get into the... If you lead teams in game or software development and you're tired of wasteful and unreliable estimation, I've built an online course just for you. It's called Advanced Estimation for Game and Software Development, and it's a self-paced course with over 15 hours of content, real-world examples, and tools you can start using right away. Estimation doesn't have to be a morale-draining mess. Planning doesn't have to feel unrealistic and contrived. You can do better, and this course will help. Early access is now open with lifetime access and a big launch discount, but there's limited seats at this price point. Check it out at this URL or in the show notes below.